Hello, everybody. My name is Jalissa Oseguera. I'm an academic tutor for the Central Valley Council.
Hi, I'm Joel, and I'm going to be tutoring in the athletics department.
I'm David. I tutor in the athletics department.
I'm Alexis, and I'll be an academic coach for SupportNet.
I'm Pakir, and I'm a graduate intern at SupportNet.
I'm Sonia, and I'm also a graduate intern for SupportNet.
So the 4 learning strategies that we have found that best help students learn is first, active learning, second, critical thinking, third, mental retrieval, fourth, study methods.
Yeah, and so the learning strategies that we will be using today, mainly for just as an example, we will be using the Socratic method, and for this method, we will be using the learning strategies active learning and critical thinking.
All right, so I have a practice problem for you guys real quick. So we have like a problem like this. 0 times x equals 5. It's kind of a silly problem, but consider this. You can't solve for x, and we know this intuitively because you can't dissolve by 0. Is this right?
Yes.
I mean, we know that you can't dissolve by 0, but why can't you divide by 0? Sorry, by 0. You can't divide by 0, and why not? What would that give you if you divide by 0? It gives you an answer. It's just we don't generally do it because it's too complicated. Well, if you don't know the answer to that, the answer is that x, if you divide by 0, excuse my finger here, it will give you infinity. And that's the answer to that. But that's a complicated answer because infinity is any number in existence. And so we don't like to focus on that.
So for example, the closed-ended question would be, can you divide by 0? And you can't. That's an easy answer, right?
Yeah.
Closed-ended. And then more critical thinking or open-ended question is, well, you can, but there's more to it, right?
Right.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
So the closed-ended question, can you divide by 0, is more a matter of simple recall for the student than making sure they paid attention in class and they remember the things they're supposed to know. If they don't know the answer, it's pretty easy to direct them to it or direct them to a place where they could find it. Sometimes their own notes, sometimes the professors, sometimes online resources. But in order for them to really understand any concept or basis for an idea like dividing by 0 and unlimited calculus, you need a little more open-ended question. Why questions typically. Why can't you divide by 0? It forces them to think about not just what they're doing, but how and why they do it.
Yeah. So for critical thinking, I would say like more self-explanation, summarizing, interleaving, elaborating more on your answer than if it was closed-ended question.
Yeah, and critical thinking typically comes after active learning. I should mention that.
Yeah, so the starting point could be like active learning, and you start asking those closed-ended questions, and you can move over to critical thinking and start asking those more difficult questions, right?
Right. The basic purpose of closed-ended questions is to get a sense of what students already know, and if they need to learn more before they move on.
Right.
So another thing about critical thinking, students could look back into if they want to study more or try to have more methods and be more interested in critical thinking, they could look back into their textbook and look at the questions at the end of each chapters or practice the given textbook quizzes as well, and they could redirect the questions and have more elaborative interrogation of like understanding why a concept is important as well, and they could try to explain a concept in a way that is different, phrase it differently from what the textbook is explaining.
Yeah, so for active learning, I think some experiences is, for example, students need more information at this learning strategy. So you can always provide, for example, YouTube videos, open courseware videos and notes, textbooks, articles, Google searches, recaps with other students or with tutors, group discussions, tutor notes, interactive dialogues, and maybe a mini lecture as well.
When you're in the study group, do you guys ever lecture to each other? Do you have a study group?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, because I think each student brings something new to the table, and like by talking and having that open discussion, maybe that little lecture, you're learning a little by each person.
I've learned that sometimes that you're a resource personally for the students you're tutoring. Like, you're not there to replace a lecturer or a professor, but sometimes it is a simple matter to give them the answer to a closed-ended question.
Right.
They don't know. I'm not an expert here, but I understand that we have a lot of resources through the school for creating quizzes, right?
Yeah, so for critical thinking, for example, students can refer to textbook questions or quizzes. There's also, I think the main goal of critical thinking is to engage students and make them more interested in the topic. So some of the methods is like ask what students really understand. So maybe having them give you a summary, having them elaborate, and then having students spend time writing their thoughts, so self-explanation as well, and then redirect questions, so interleaving in a bit.
Also, for critical thinking, some probing questions that would be helpful to ask in a group discussion, for example, would be what makes you think that, so they can have a better understanding of what they are trying to learn. Another question would be, please give an example from your own experience. And then lastly, you can also ask, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I like those questions for all seasons.
Yeah.
They're non-specific, but they're applicable to most things you'd ask about.
It gets them to think more outside the box and not just like a simple response. It makes them think of a bigger picture and stuff like that, so they have a better understanding.
And you ever ask students to lecture to you?
Yeah.
Right, like you do in groups.
So for critical thinking, for example, you can always put up like an incorrect problem or problems and have students identify or fix the errors. You also remember how to use the questioning techniques that you learned in like the art of questioning. And it seems simple enough, but the challenge for most tutors is that they only do ask effective questions when they think the student is not sure of something. So asking questions should be done mostly when students are correct, and then asking like, oh, that's right. Why is it true though? So that you not only you know that they know, but why? What's behind that?
I think that's really useful. I think it's really interesting too, the probing when they're correct. It also shatters illusions of competence in the students, and they think they already know it. So you can know it more, and it's a really good to do that.
Trying to challenge a student can be really helpful.
I think another one for critical thinking is the wait time. In my experience, there's a lot of times where students feel like they know it, but they're too shy or they don't want to speak out or explain what they're trying to, explain what they're seeing. So seeing that tutors or seeing that the facilitator is using the wait time to actually give the floor to the students to actually organize their thought, and then putting it out into words or into diagram is really helpful for critical thinking in my experience.
I want to tie back to active learning real quick. I'm just noticing, textbook questions, book and textbooks. What's the difference between the two here?
So the textbook questions, I think, refer back to what you read. So you know how at the end of the chapter, there's like a question, there's questions that you can answer.
Mhm.
I think that's what is referring to critical thinking. You're thinking back on what you read, the textbook questions. Whereas the book and active learning, you're reading it. You are going through the book yourself and actually learning it yourself.
For the first time sometimes.
Yeah,
Right, so I could learn about doing.
yeah,
Yeah.
the book and the textbook. Yeah.
It's the first thing you do
Mhm.
always.
Whereas-
And it's what you go back to doing when you get to critical thinking, for example, and you find yourself unable to answer questions about why anything works.
Yeah.
Right. Quick examples for the other two that we haven't really talked about. This will take the slide. Like mental retrieval, that's basically recalling what you've learned in lecture without your notes. I personally, I find it really good resources. Quizlet,
Yeah.
really good one. Or just, regular flashcards. Quizzes is flashcards, just
Yeah.
electronic. Those are really good resources to use.
Yeah, like practice tests, because it's preparing students for the event that will determine their grade, for example. So that's mental retrieval practice tests. I know 1-minute quizzes are quick, but there is no reason a student cannot carve 1 minute from their homework to do a quick quiz, just to make sure that they're understanding what they're learning or they know what they're learning. Study methods. I know we all have different study methods, like flashcards is one of them. Quizlet is similar to that, but I think for me, study method for my flashcards, it benefits me when I write it out and when I make my own flashcards, because I'm writing it out as if I'm doing kind of like something like notes, but then I also have it as a tool to refer back to. So that's the study method that I use, but obviously every student's going to use something different. So.
For instance, for me, I'm a chemistry major, so we have a lot of, we take physics and math too. We have a lot of formula sheets, so it's really hard to study for these kind of fundamental science classes because it's just basically you have to know the formula, know how to use it. So I find a really effective strategy for science majors. Before like a test, you go to a worksheet, or even when you're just given like practice problems, you don't try to solve the problem. You just try to write down the formula you use to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really effective too. It saves you time, and it's just that's really what the professors want to know how to do. Personally, that's like my favorite study method. It's just kind of the formula sheet itself is my study, right?
Yeah.
I find that regardless of how students study, the biggest problem, and this occurs at all levels of education, is when they study.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So it's counterintuitive that you should only study for brief periods of time, usually less than an hour at a time, but you should be doing that multiple times a week.
Yeah, taking breaks too.
Leading up to something.
Mm-hmm. As opposed to cramming, right?
Yeah, when I have students who come in and say, I have a test tomorrow and I need to learn everything I haven't been paying attention to. I can certainly present them with all the information they need, but it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Especially even if it works well enough for them to pass a test, they're not going to remember any of it by the time they take their final.
Information needs to be
So, yeah, repetition is really important. It's part of mental retrieval, I guess, is the ability to actually do problems the right way more than once.
So I think when it comes down to study methods, each student will probably have their own way that they learn best. Not every student's the same.
At the end of the day, I think all these really, they're all important to learn something thoroughly. I mean, you can learn at surface level with active learning, but you go through all of them, you'll learn at a pretty deep level.
Yeah, they all complement each other. And they don't have to be used in an order. I think they can all be used in any way that the student can benefit from.
For example, some students learn best by going off a study guide the professor hands them, or reviewing their notes that they have taken before an exam. Also, going to a professor's office hours would be helpful. But yeah, that's just my opinion. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
We just want to go over the 4 learning strategies that we went over in this video. We went over active learning, critical thinking, mental retrieval, and study methods, but we mainly focused on active learning and critical thinking because we are also trying to focus on the Socratic method. So always keep in mind those 4 active learning strategies, all those 4 learning strategies.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.